Hey, everybody. Welcome to Question Christianity. We are currently live, if you're watching this, at 6:31 Eastern Standard Time on whatever day it is today, September 28th. Today, we're going to be talking about the tip of the iceberg of a lot of the things we have talked about the last few weeks. We've spent some time discussing critical race theory, critical theory, a lot of the stuff that goes with that. We've also spent some time discussing some of the race issues in this country, as well as social justice and equality and what people mean by these things. Today, we're going to deal with a couple of the other kind of terms that come up in discussing this and kind of what I would consider a lot of the kind of outcome of a lot of these other things as to kind of what point we've reached with some of this. So we'll be talking about cancel culture and white fragility and a little bit perhaps about cultural Marxism. So that's what's in store for tonight. Now, again, coming into this, we've had multiple weeks of kind of building up and kind of having this discussion and building the groundwork for this kind of discussion here. So I do encourage people to go back, check out the prior videos, because it really is a lot of groundwork for kind of the talk we're having at this point. But please feel free, put questions in chat. Let's have this be as much open discussion as possible. Would one of y'all like to just recap things for us in the best way you could put it in a nutshell?
Kevin? Oh, wow. Well, what have we talked about? Last time we talked about Black Lives Matter, the organization. Time before that, we talked about Black Lives Matter, the statement. And I think we generally found that we certainly agreed with the sentiment that Black Lives Matter with no holds barred, and that we had some serious reservations about some of the self-stated goals of Black Lives Matter, the organization.
I'm going to jump in right there for a second. It is worth noting that in the same week we did our broadcast, and granted, I don't think we had anything to do with this. It's been pointed out by people with a lot more sway in these things than us. But within that same week of doing our broadcast, that page that had the statements that we looked at last week was pulled down from the website.
Well, so that's interesting. Now, why is that? Is it because they changed what they believe?
Election year, maybe?
Or were they just... I wonder why they pulled it down. Okay, so yeah, interesting. All right, so we talked about Black Lives Matter, the organization. We found that at least what was up there before, we had some serious disagreements based on just our worldview. I think it would be safe to say the Christian worldview, if not emotionally necessarily, but just if we objectively evaluated the Christian worldview, we found it to be incompatible with some of the explicit statements of the Black Lives Matter, the organization, at least before it was pulled down. I don't want to hog. What do you think, Kev? Can I call you Kevin?
No, I agree exactly with your recollections, and of course we looked at critical theory in general a bit before that, right. And saw some of the limitations of that logically, and again, all those things. I know we encourage folks to go back and look at those previous episodes to see a pretty careful discussion that we try to do point by point there.
Yeah. And I don't think it should really be much of a logical step to say that you could support the statement and even many of the activities involved with the statement of Black Lives Matter without necessarily having to support the organization. I don't know why those things have to be linked.
Right, there's no logical reason for them to be necessarily linked.
Yeah. Now, I would say, and well, it depends on how much we're going to talk about this, but I would say that it might even be, well, certainly, I think, upon deep reflection and investigation, that looking at some of these statements of the Black Lives Matter, the organization, I truly believe that those things could be harmful if you really cared about Black Lives Matter, the statement. Certainly, that might be a contentious point, but I do believe that. So I think supporting the organization is harmful to Black lives and all lives. But
yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. And maybe this is a good time to jump back in with some of the stuff we talked about last time that we kind of went over pretty quickly. But in looking at the compatibility with these things in Christianity, I throw this up, but when it comes to critical race theory and a lot of the issues out there front and center right now, what would be your kind of takeaways for Christians as to where we can build common ground?
Well, I think certainly one of the most important fundamental things that we can say, that we really can't say enough, and that we have said, is that we see all human beings as equally valuable, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, or even political beliefs. Well, I shouldn't even say even. It's like despite, like your political beliefs, your gender, race, ethnicity, whatever. Like whatever. I might violently disagree with some of your ideas, and you are just as equally valuable as a human being as any other person on the planet. It has there's no degrading effect of anything like that. Like, what could be more fundamentally important agreement than that?
Right. Common ground, by definition, means that both parties or persons in dialogue can appeal to reason, can listen to each other. A common ground has to be, in some sense, an equal ground as far as whatever the arbiter is. What I'm getting at is if some approach wants to silence one party or one side of the dialogue, then it's not that. So common ground has no meaning if we start off with that sort of rule, that only one person can only listen, and if one person is only allowed to listen, presumably because they can't understand, then what's the point of listening? And what would common ground mean? What's the goal ultimately? Right. So I guess we'll get to that on white fragility in a moment, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it's as good a point as any to move into some of these other issues and concerns that we're talking about tonight, because we really didn't get to talk about any of these things in any great detail last time. So first, this kind of concept of white fragility. How would we kind of define that? Of course, this is based on largely on the work of Robin DiAngelo, who's a sociologist and has coined this term for her book of the same name that has blown up rather recently.
Well, I'll give it a start, and then maybe you guys can fill in where I missed. But I think just maybe the 30,000-foot view of the term white fragility, and maybe what it indicates is that white people in general or perhaps even in total, are fragile in the inability to accept and admit the inherent racism that they have. So they can't admit the racism because they're too fragile. They can't be adult enough to, or mature enough, or even aware enough to see and realize the racism that is in fact there. So the racism is assumed, where all white people are racist, and the amount of fragility you have is basically equivalent to how much denial you have of that. I don't know. What I miss on that?
Yeah, and any objection, any response other than compliance or full agreement is automatically a proof of your fragility.
Yeah, further. So what I just did right there, if I was to deny that that's actually true, I'm just demonstrating my own fragility. It's like, oh, he's really fragile. He doesn't agree with white fragility. Wow, that guy's super fragile.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest challenge with this whole definition. I think there probably is some actual white fragility out there in some forms. I do think it's probably something that does exist on some level that, maybe with the right kind of implicit bias scale, we could actually measure and see what percentage of the population really has kind of a strong bias present via, an actual study on how they respond to elements of racism. But for me, the problem is the definition is so all-encompassing for any response you could possibly give that if it's someone's interpretation that your response is fragile in some ways, then it is.
Yeah, it's totally self-defeating. So I think one of the things that we're going to find from a Christian worldview that we're going to just keep on butting heads with these ideas is the denial of individual sovereignty or individuality, in fact. So one of the key concepts behind white fragility is that, well, if you're white, then here's certain things that automatically apply to you. And it doesn't matter what you as an individual might actually think. That's a denial of that. It's an explicit denial that you as an individual might actually not be racist. Like there's no room for that. There's no room for an individual. Certainly, like what you're saying, certainly there are white racists in America. No doubt. But what I'm saying is there are certain individuals who are racist. Individuals on both sides. Like well, we're not going to get there yet, but the idea of redefining racism is, well, it's ridiculous. So, but the point that I want to back up and reemphasize is it's got to be individual. Like there's got to be individual accountability. There's got to be individual identification. There's got to be room for individuals to talk. So who is Robert DiAngelo? She's a white woman, and kind of like the inherent ideology behind that is because she's white, she gets to be an avatar that speaks for the white community and tells everyone else what the white community thinks. Sorry, it's just human beings are not avatars of a identity group. We are all individuals. And it's a wonderful gift that God has given us. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It's why I deny racism. It's the entire idea behind that isn't just that, well, I think black people are just as valuable as white people. It's that we're all individuals. Like it's not that a black person is just as valuable. It's that individual person is a human being and they're individual. Like a black person doesn't think what black people think. Like it's so ridiculous. And neither do white people. People are people. It's so intuitive, and it's so dehumanizing. That's why I can't stomach this stuff.
It's a very good point, and it's dehumanizing, and that's an irony because our overall theme here is oppression, right? And what is oppression ultimately, other than a collective repressing of individuals regarding things such as their right to describe their own position, their right to their own self-reflection, and having some level of merit to that. If any one individual claims to speak for everyone else, and philosophizes in such a way that their rejection of this self-appointed mouthpiece status, is automatic evidence that they're wrong. That sounds like a sort of bullying, really.
If you want like just a classic live cultural proof of this, certainly we would say that there are such things as white liberals. Like, you can be white and a liberal, and that's okay. That's even celebrated. If you're a white conservative, it's like, well, of course you're a conservative, because you're racist. But what does the culture have to say about black conservatives, of which there are, of course, plenty and many? They're called typically Uncle Toms or various other names. Like, why is that? Why is it that a black person is not somehow allowed to be conservative in their own individual thoughts and beliefs? Why is that so counterculture?
There's a fear of independent thinking on either, talk about extremists on either side maybe, but in what we're talking about, there's a fear of independent thinking. These are elitists who do want to control, I think, and speak for other people in one direction or another. It either boils down to the same thing. Right, scared of independent thinking.
Yeah. Well, if I wanted power, what I would want to do is repress individual sovereignty. If I wanted power, that's what I would do. And I would try to, as much as I could, force people to think of themselves as a group without any individuality. Much more easy to control.
Needing to be identified and classified by their elites.
Yeah. And the second thing I do is make those people dependent upon me. So if they didn't have me, then they'd be desperate in some measure. If I wanted power over people, those are at least, and probably I'd want to disarm them, but we don't have to go there. What would I do if I wanted to increase individual sovereignty? I just left that question hang heavy.
Encourage all individuals to speak for themselves to each other directly.
Oh, to communicate without, to celebrate communication of ideas.
Without their cultural mediators.
Yeah. Why would we need cultural mediators? Why would we even need those? If we're celebrating individual, gosh, human beings are so amazing. You watch the Olympics. The Olympics, I mean, it's a physical aspect of that, but human beings are just amazing creatures. They're amazing. The things that a human being can do, it's just raw determination and applied discipline and skill and talent. Gosh, it's just amazing. People are in their daily jobs. If you've had the same job for 10 years, you're probably amazing. Or you've learned special skills in that where you can just, whatever it is, man, if you're a janitor, like, your ability at being a janitor is probably highly tuned and amazing and truly in its own way. Like, just because we're just good. We're just amazing like that. I mean, I'm not denying our fallen nature at all. I'm just saying, even still, like, God has made us just this amazing individual creatures. We're to be celebrated in that respect. But we are fallen. So maybe it's no surprise then that we're even talking about these things.
That's a good point, and I think, again, like I said, I think one of the main issues is this is such a wide open label that can be slapped on anything, that it's really just a stop button to stop that kind of conversation from happening. Because all of a sudden, if my response is even seemingly defensive of something I'm defending personally, then all of a sudden that can be fragility of whatever the belief or idea that I'm defending is. This doesn't have to stop at white fragility. It can be Christian fragility, male fragility. All these terms have, I feel like they're going to be born out of this at some point, because it ends the conversation. It stops it.
Why would you want to end a conversation? I mean, that's a question that really needs to be asked. It kind of goes what we were talking about before. Like, why would you want to stop a conversation?
Presumably, best foot forward, presumably best case scenario, because you really think the other person can't think for themselves, or that their thoughts are going to get in the way of your advanced truth that needs to be revealed to them without interruption.
It's kind of an interesting tie-in, but if you've been in Christian apologetics probably for a fair amount of time, you've run across Greg Koukl's tactics, and it's just an interesting juxtaposition there, because the and this is endorsed and embraced by I think many, if not most, apologists, this Koukl tactics, which is one of the most important and best things you can do when you run up against someone who you disagree with is to hear them out. It's like, it's not like you're trying to trap them. It's like you really want to hear them out. So if someone says, I think Christianity is a myth, like the best tactical response you can say is, go on. Like, what? Tell me about that. Like, tell me everything you think about that, because I really want to hear your point. I want to make sure I understand it. And so if we're truly are white and fragile, probably one of the best tactics that someone on the other side is to have a conversation with us, and even if it's to let us say things that show that we truly are fragile, and maybe we'll say those. Well, certainly some of us might say those, but conversation's a wonderful, powerful, uniting thing. That's the other thing about tactics, is the process of, if you have someone that disagrees with your worldview, and they say something that you really disagree with, whether it be emotional or logical or evidential, say, well, tell me all about your view. Not only are you hearing them out, not only are you clarifying your understanding of them, you're developing a relationship at that point. That's super important. If we really are white and fragile, one of the most important things, which I don't think we are, by the way, but even if we are collectively, all white people, one of the best things is to have conversations with us. Why? If there really is going to be some racial conciliation here, it seems like it might involve conversation, two-sided. It seems like a very powerful thing. It's always been powerful. We're human beings.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Well, I think we're changing the world right now.
So there was an interesting example of this that came up over the weekend, that I really think is worth sharing on some level, because we've talked a lot about what it is, but we haven't talked much about kind of some some solid examples of this, and I want to talk about one that I think is very, very dangerous because for me personally, this is a really, I don't know, I can't think of an example of somebody calling out white fragility that would be more deadly and damaging than kind of this response I saw over the weekend. And to be fair, this response is by one of the current kind of big authors in the critical race theory movement, Ibram X. Kendi. And he's founder of this whole being an anti-racist movement. Out of all these popular books out there, I will say his is probably the most balanced in terms of having some real practical suggestions of, how to move towards stuff together. Now, do I agree with all of it? Absolutely not. I'm not even fully endorsing it. But out of all the books out there, this is the most balanced one I found from one of these critical race authors. But then over the weekend, in relation to the Supreme Court justice nomination, he put out this comment.
Colonizers.
Because, and apparently there's some controversy over the picture he used because it was the nomination's sister or something like that. They have a couple of Haitian children that they adopted. But this is one example of somebody calling out what would be considered white fragility, adopting a child of another race or another background. That's white fragility under this view.
It's like, is there anything that you ever could do besides just shut up and do what, critical theory tells you that?
Well, silence is also white fragility.
Yeah, checkmate, man. I'm done. Wow, look at some of the terms in there. Colonizers. Wow.
I would love to know if he's ever adopted any children. That would be my first question.
Why can't it just be children? Why can't it just be this one human being adopted these two individual children and loved them? Like, what?
I've been through the process of becoming a foster parent, and you have an option as to what you're looking for. I don't think anybody who goes through that process doesn't consider and weigh the real challenges that could come with having a child of a race different than your family. There are challenges associated with that for the child and for the
child,
family.
Especially for the child, yeah.
Yeah. And there are challenges associated with that. And I don't think anybody sets out with this kind of mindset.
I want to colonize these savages. Like, gosh. Oh.
Even implicitly, I don't think that any of the people that I know, have set out to do anything like this, even subconsciously. That's a hard decision for anybody to make, to foster or adopt a kid. And, everybody I've dealt with who's done that has come from a place of truly caring about people, truly caring about these kids, and even with the families that are involved in these situations. That's not to say there's not some bad ones out there. I'm sure there are people who break this mold, but again, it goes back to dealing with the individual. Yeah.
And this is an example of what we alluded to early on in the program of BLM, the organization or the ideology, being counterproductive to young Black lives. In this case, I wonder if the testimony of adopted children counts You know, apparently this fellow thinks that we should let orphans be orphans if they're not the same color as us.
Can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Yeah, the argument from and I've really tried to get in the head of people who hold to this mindset. I've tried to understand this concept, and the response to that kind of thing would be that, you know, children who are adopted into some of these families, you know, that even creates a white fragility within them, if you will. I mean, it's an idea that, you know, their opinion's even valued less because of the family they're within at this point, because they don't have to grow up. If it's a more wealthy family, they're brought into that, or if it's a white family, period, they're brought into that and thus have some degree of umbrella, if you will. So it's even brought back on them in some ways. It's a lose-lose.
Yeah, to me, this is just so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking on so many levels. I mean, are we really to think now, is this, I think you said was this a indirect attack on the Supreme Court justice nominee? I can't hear you.
Sorry, should have unmuted. Yeah. It was intended as a direct comment. Found out later that, you know, the picture used was not correct. There was a family member instead of her. But yeah, that's how it was intended.
So is he saying, is Kendi here saying that she believes that she adopted the savages, like that the children she adopted were savages? Is that what he's implying, or not even implying, stating?
With white fragility, these concepts are not considered surface level things people understand in a lot of the situations. It's something that is so ingrained within culture that regardless of whether someone sees it as a cause for their actions, it is a cause for their actions.
There's just so much to go over here that, and it's probably not a valid use of time, but I mean, what are the ways of white people? What are the ways? I missed the meeting. What's the ways of white people?
I must have missed that meeting too, because
is it? I don't know what it is. I've seen a lot of white people in my time.
But clearly, there's only one way we have. You know.
Yeah. I kind of I missed my handbook, my white people handbook. Gotta look. I mean, I mean, you go next door, and how the white or black or whatever people next door are going to raise their kids in different culture. I mean, I'm pretty good friends with both of you, and I'm pretty sure we raise our children in different ways, and maybe there's some commonality to those, but I don't know that they're white. Gosh, what are these? Well, we're Christian, so it's going to go back to that Middle Eastern Jewish guy that were, I guess, established our white people ways.
Because he was white, of course.
Yeah, white Jesus.
Which, I think in the next couple episodes we're going to get into some problems with that too. But this kind of brings us into this next kind of thing we mentioned talking about, which is cancel culture. I mean, what do you do when you have a checkmate on anything somebody says or does? You cancel them.
So can you just kind of define that out for maybe me and the listeners at large? What does that cancel culture really mean?
Yeah, so I would say for me, my personal definition, this is not the Google definition, would be it is the societal movement to eliminate dissenting voices.
And it seems like that includes any references to historical figures or the like. So, removing historical, good, bad, or ugly, like, talk about removing the Washington Monument. Seems like that's a cancel culture type thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we see a lot of it play out in terms of historical figures, but I think we also see it play out in terms of,
Yeah.
The voices people take even within, YouTube or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody who is seen under a certain party line, whether it be political, religious, whatever, and this person dissents in some way from what is viewed as the core elements of that group, then all of a sudden their view no longer matters to that community, and it's time to eliminate hearing from them.
Mm-hmm. Eliminate hearing from them.
This happened recently with an atheist group out of Texas, the atheist community of Austin, which runs the Atheist Experience show. A popular atheist YouTuber made some comments about disagreeing with transgender sports issues. The whole issue of transgenders in sports. He made some dissenting remarks, and essentially, boom,
cancel.
Done with him. No longer part of this. We're going to distance ourselves from him as much as possible.
Yeah. So the tie in there, it seems like what we're kind of getting closer to defining is this cancel culture is no voice to those who disagree, whether it be from current culture or from historic figures. We want them removed, so they have no voice, no impact.
Classically, that would be the notion of dominance.
Yeah, the question needs to be asking, why would you want to do that? When do you want to silence those who disagree with you? I mean, I know when I do it with my wife. Not that I'm ever successful, but it's when you.
So you're saying you don't want to silence people if you know you're wrong.
Yeah, well, if you think you're right, what you want to do is talk through it and try to, have a conversation and convince the other people through good reason, logical, discussion. Like, what is an argument? So, like an argument in the traditional sense is, it could be defined in a couple ways, but a good definition of a good argument is two or more people trying to discover truth together. That's an argument. And as I've heard it cleverly stated, a fight always ruins a good argument. All right. So an argument is just like, what do we want? Like if I'm having a true good argument with someone, we both want the truth. And we're willing to change our minds, but we have certain ideas that we think are true, or at least carry some weight. And so we want to throw those out there and say, yeah, what about this? And we're encouraging response because our goal is not to be right. Our goal is to find truth.
But if you're convinced that you already have all the truth, and no one else does, then there's no need for argument. People just need to listen to you.
Yeah, and I think that's better stated than what I said, which is, or maybe implied, which is the idea that you think you're wrong, you don't want to hear it. More dangerous, though, is you're convinced that you're right, and so further investigation, well, all I know is all I need to know. Those are very dangerous words.
I think I've been guilty of both of those on any number of topics. But what's scary here is that what we would admit as a mistake is being canonized as a total epistemology that we should bow to.
Epistemology?
Yeah, a whole way of knowing what's true, or discovering it, or justifying your claims. Well, you don't need to. If our cultural elites have decided among themselves what that is, and the only argument that's needed is to convince us that we no longer need to argue with them, sounds like the book.
Okay, so let me fire back. Maybe someone who's watching this will say, you Christians, you're being, right now, you guys are just being totally hypocritical because you do the same thing with your Bible. You read that thing, it's all you know, and it's like whatever that says, and no one's going to ever change your mind.
Yeah, if that were the mindset, that would be hypocrisy. And I'm sure there are a number of professing Christians who do take that shallow view, but I'm not sure if I know anyone who actually says that all we know or need to know is contained in the Bible.
Well, certainly it's at least shallow. I like that. It's at least a shallow view of things.
Right. To say that for a Christian to say that all we know is what's in the Bible, first of all, is self-contradictory, because I know that. So there's another knowledge claim that's not in the Bible if I do know it. And so, a thoughtful Christian, it's a straw man. And just like we don't want to misrepresent or mischaracterize the white fragility position, I want to try to really get into the head of that. Hopefully, someone who's seriously critical of Christianity will actually understand what thoughtful Christians believe when they say they're Christians, and what they say the role of the Bible, which is authoritative, what that role is in their faith. It's not a matter of everyone be quiet and listen to a single interpreter of reality, individual interpreter of reality for you. Although there are probably some churches out there that operate that way.
Sure. Well, a lot of heresies start that way.
Yes.
Under this whole umbrella of critical theory and critical race theory, though, I think this makes a lot of sense, because everything you're talking about deals with a reasoned kind of approach to these issues. There are reasons why we want to listen to other people. There are reasons why we should be open to other opinions on things. But from a critical theory side of it, truth is determined by emotion and by how many minority groups you fit into. So it makes sense to use, to just shut down voices that don't have enough truth, if you will, to be part of the conversation.
I think the most dangerous things that have ever happened in history happen when people substitute objective truth for emotion.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
I would agree.
It's a bloody game.
All right, so let's touch on this last thing here, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. But this whole idea of cultural Marxism, what I've seen has been two very distinct kind of views. We've talked a little bit about some of this and how a lot of these ideas come out of that Frankfurt School. in terms of where this has kind of come in and seeped into education. And it's one of those things that a lot of prominent people kind of point out being an issue within the education system. You know, critical theory is replacing more reasoned approaches to things within a lot of universities. And, you know, people like Jonathan Haidt, who is an atheist psychologist, you know, point this out in terms of this is a problem because it's overtaking, you know, a lot of the intellectual areas versus kind of this whole idea that it's a big conspiracy that Marxism is active within the culture at all, and that it's, you know, trying to take over everything and tear down the entire system we have. What are y'all's thoughts on the whole thing?
That reminds me that, well, it goes back to the cancel culture, actually, not the cultural Marxism, but when you brought up atheist thinkers who recognize some of these problems, I just was watching Bill Maher, who is super hostile to religion of any sort.
For sure.
He had one rant recently about cancel culture. And honestly, he made a lot of really good points just from, you know, a libertarian free thinking point of view. We're going to, you know, apply this consistently. Nothing will be left for anyone's speech. Of course, at the end of that rant, he turned it into, if you're going to cancel anything, cancel God, because of all the things he said or failed to say that we think he should have said. But then just today I saw he had a segment, a dialogue with Megyn Kelly, who was canceled some time ago for some comparatively innocuous remark. And although they're on different political spectrums, he was, you know, he told her that it was ridiculous, the reaction that that she was subjected to, being canceled for her statement, when in, you know, common sense is if you recognize you said something wrong and say, oh, that was an artless thing for me to say. I didn't think about it that way. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And then you move on, correct yourself and move on. He again, from an opposite political position, was really irate that she had been subjected to that. Went on about how ridiculous it was. But anyway, more time I wanted to spend on that. But
well, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And one of the things that, as you were talking through that it made me just think is, you know, where is the place for redemption? Because redemption is a powerful thing in many ways, if not at the very least, just, you know, the fact that, okay, one, we're all human beings and we've all made probably some very serious detrimental choices in our life. But, you know, with true redemption, like we can be turned around and we can do good things. But if you're just canceled, it's like, you're canceled. Get out of here. You're never going to be any good because you did this one thing. You're now basically useless. There's no redemption for you. That's not healthy. It's not good. And well, let me take it the other way. Redemption is such a beautiful gift given to us by God. It's so amazing. You know, the fact that I can be who I am and have made the choices that I made, and yet be fully redeemed in Christ. You know, it's like, and then continue to fall again in the future, or often, or daily, or whatever it is, and Christ is essentially there saying, you know, not disagreeing with the fact that I've screwed up, but saying, yeah, you screwed up again. Now, stand back up. I've got you covered. And let's continue to walk this out in the best way you can from here forward. And I know that you're going to fall again. And when you do, I'm going to pick you up again. And we are going to walk this together for the rest of your life. And you, he's going to, gosh, it's so beautiful. He's going to shepherd me. He's going to shepherd me for the rest of my life. He's going to redeem me and continue to redeem me for the rest of my life. And because of that, well, I hope that I can do wonderful things despite the horrible things that I've done. And to rob human beings of that, it's cruel. It's dehumanizing. You're not worthy of redemption. Well, Christ says you are. Through him, of course, not through the culture. The culture,
right, or through
the
yourself.
culture does not get. So I'll just say this: if anyone feels like they've been canceled out there, and maybe there's some, whether you're a school teacher who has tried to uphold your principles, no pun intended, in a school or at work, and you have been effectively canceled, my brotherly counsel for you is they don't get the final say. So that's cancel culture.
Yeah, and I think that brings up this whole point with cultural Marxism. And in looking this up just now, apparently under Wikipedia, even to use the term cultural Marxism is used within the context of a conspiracy theory now. To even use this kind of term. And I think what we've talked about the last few weeks has been exactly that. It's these ideas seeping in to culture and to seep in such a way that it erodes the foundation of relationships, of reason, and of the chance for redemption. All those things are being eroded when these ideas become the leading ideas in terms of how we dictate truth and how we deal with other people.
I'm still reeling from the idea that just to use the term is to be a part of, or say, a conspiracy theory. The last statistic I heard on professors and Marxism was that 1 in 5 college professors identified themselves as Marxist, self-identified.
Oh, sorry, I got rid of Kevin for a second. Self-identified, and how many did you say that was?
I believe, and so let me know if I'm wrong, but I believe the last statistic I heard on this was 1 in 5. 1 in 5. Those are the instructors of our higher learning education systems. And if they are, and when you see groups like Antifa or others walking around with the hammer and sickle, I don't think it's an automatic conspiracy theory just to say there might be some of this happening in our culture.
Yeah, so here's the official Wikipedia page at this point, which redirects you from cultural Marxism to cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. So apparently, to even hold to the fact that these ideas are seeping into culture is now going to label you a conspiracy theorist.
Well, okay. It seems like it's following the trend. It's like silence those who disagree with you. Let's not have conversation. I mean, certainly there are, whatever the segment is, there's going to be a subsegment of the society who are Marxist. Right? Are we really going to deny that?
I mean, a lot of people are very open about this at this point. It's not a mark of shame for anyone. They happily admit to, I have friends who happily admit to being Marxist. And it's like, okay.
If Bernie Sanders, who I understand was not a Marxist, he's a socialist, I understand the difference. But if Bernie Sanders got such a wide following being a socialist, are we really to think that there aren't some people a little bit more on the left, like a wide majority that are a little bit more on the left who fall into the Marxist category? I don't see that that's automatically a conspiracy theory. It just seems like common sense. It seems like another way to shut down the conversation.
And perhaps where it's turned conspiracy theory is this idea that it is going to be something designed to actually tear down the current system in place. I think these ideas are tearing down a lot of the foundations we have in terms of, reason and truth, whether it's, directly geared to completely destroy America so they can rebuild it. That's in a little bit of a different ballpark. But the fact of the matter is it's already eroding a lot of the foundations for a stable society.
So America it's pretty capitalist, right? It's well, at least it was kind of founded on that. I'm wondering how you can get Marxism and all that entails without tearing it down. Like
that's a good point.
Kind of mutually exclusive. Okay. That's just your conspiracy theorist here.
Opining. Speaking of conspiracy
this
theories.
White, fragile conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I don't know if we've won anybody over tonight, but I hope that if they go back and see a couple of the prior episodes where we discussed these issues kind of in depth, they'll see where this conversation tonight has come from, because this is really just, the tip of the iceberg you hear about versus all the stuff that's underlying it. That's underneath the surface there that we've talked about the last few weeks.
Yeah, I don't think we were. If someone came in here and they would consider themselves agreeing with critical theory and cultural Marxism and cancel culture, and if they think those things are right and true, I don't think that we've convinced anyone, and I don't know that is really even my goal. What I'm hoping is that there's a segment of those who are listening who are just unfamiliar with what those things entail. I mean, you hear the term critical theory, and it sounds really kind of close to like critical thinking, and critical thinking is a pretty good thing. So critical theory, it's like maybe it's the theory of critical thinking, or it's a theory of being critical, and maybe there are times to be a critic, and that's certainly true, but it's not what it sounds like. And so just, I think, educating people to what is really going on with things like the Black Lives Matter organization and ideologies like critical theory, cultural Marxism, the danger of silencing those who object with you. It's a danger. The divisiveness that happens, the inability for reconciliation, the necessary conflict and mutual exclusion of these ideas with the Christian worldview as taught by Christ. Maybe if some people just become a little bit more aware of that, and then want to see if we're just a couple of three quacks who are really wrong, like go double check us, like let us know if we're wrong. But just being aware of these things is, well, J. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. Right? So be informed. These things are not happening in a corner.
Speaking of things happening in corners, we're going to shift gears after this week just a little bit. We've spent weeks and weeks discussing critical theory, social justice, and the many kind of nuances of those kind of things. This is really kind of the turning point, and we're going to kind of shift and look at some other things at this point. And, really looking at, we've looked at a lot of what would be considered very left-leaning things, if you will, because a lot of what we have discussed have been movements that are largely associated with the left side of the political spectrum. What we're looking at here, though, is biblical Christianity. So that is not exclusive to the right side of the spectrum or the left side of the spectrum. It's not a political movement. So we're going to kind of switch gears and take a look at a couple things that are more on the right side of the spectrum, if you will. And the big thing we're going to be looking at next is going to be the QAnon group. So we're going to look at that through a biblical lens. We're going to see if QAnon holds up to scrutiny from a Christian perspective and what issues may underlie the surface there.
Very good.
Well, thank you for being here tonight, gentlemen. And we will look forward to another episode here in 2 weeks. If anybody has any questions, comments, please go ahead and drop them in the comments section. Whether you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, if you would subscribe or like our page, if you've just enjoyed the discussion, even if you disagree, and just want to come back and, maybe interact a little bit more with us, that would be fantastic. We're here as a interactive group as much as we possibly can, and we welcome people's questions and comments. So please go ahead and provide those. And again, we'll be back in 2 weeks to begin looking at QAnon.
Awesome. Thank you, Caleb.
Thank y'all. Have a great night.